To introduce this evening and to welcome you. I think it's wonderful to see so many young couples and families here tonight. I congratulate you for being here and having the interest to come and show up. In the 1760s and 70s, America had a great decision before them. They didn't know if they could be free. And they started a discussion. They met in schools like this, they met in public places, and they argued and they discussed and they talked, and by the time 1776 came, they had made the decision. They were ready for freedom. Tonight we're here about an education issue. We're probably a little behind what they were. They started years ahead. We have it in front of us now. And it's time for discussion. And so I'm tickled that you're here, and I hope that even after tonight the discussion continues. Let me share with you, in January, I serve on the Senate Education Committee, and Judy Boyle, who's here tonight, somewhere. Judy, where are you at? Judy's over here, I'm sorry. I see Lawrence Denny here also. Representative Denny, both of them are here. Judy serves on the... She serves on the House Education Committee. And with Common Core coming before us and the discussion that had ensued, it was determined that we would have a joint hearing between the two committees on Common Core and invited various people across the state who were involved to come and participate in a panel like you can see tonight and discuss Common Core. And so I hope that when you get done tonight, you know more and you understand more, and you begin to formulate and see and look for those principles that will enable us to look for the education of our children, not to slow them down, but to move them ahead in our world today. You know, but it is time, it's past time for us to have this discussion now. What we want in education for our children. I, as a legislator, couldn't be more happy to see you here. I wish this building was full tonight to hear and discuss and talk about that. There's been a little write-up, but I'd just like to kind of briefly peruse through that to give some of you the background, because some of you probably know a lot about it, and some of you maybe are a little unsure. But Common Core state standards is an attempt to standardize education and testing so we can evaluate how we're sizing up to the rest of the world. The goal is to increase learning standards to make our children more college ready and more competitive in a global economy. Two associations, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, asked a private organization called Achieve to develop the standards. Once the standards were developed, the copyright was given to these two associations. States were given the opportunity to adopt Common Core standards. In the process, were allowed a waiver to drop the very unpopular No Child Left Behind. In adopting Common Core, states could then apply for federal funding under the Race to the Top stimulus package. Idaho became one of 45 states that initially adopted the standards and subsequently applied for federal funding. 5 states did not go along. I personally talked to the superintendent of the Texas schools. I called and we had quite a visit for a while, and we discussed, why did you not go into Common Core? And he expressed the fact that they already had standards that they had used since 1995, and they felt they were more than adequate. I said, how about your children? With them being tested in Common Core, are you worried? He said, absolutely not. So that was a discussion they had ahead of time. We didn't have that discussion in the state, and we need to have it now. So let it go forward. I'll turn the mic over to Larry Walker to moderate the panel, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Unknown to many of you, I'm Larry Walker from Weiser. I practiced law there for 40 years, so I've had a little chance at moderating or smoothing over or whatever we have to do tonight. And I hope that we all understand there are not going to be any laws changed tonight. But it is going to educate us, hopefully. And we have people here who can influence and change the law. We have some who are running for positions that will possibly have an effect on that later. So what we'd like to do tonight is, if you haven't picked it up already, we have cards here. We'll bring them out to you, and you can write your question down. And then we will look through the questions and answer questions. If the panel will answer questions, we have 6 members of the panel here. We'll introduce them here in a minute, have them introduce themselves. And they have experience on both sides of the coin. Some have supported it, some have had challenges with it. And so we're going to hear their positions and educate ourselves so that we can then make an informed decision. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing that hasn't got anything to do with this. My wife and I just got back here a few months ago from a 20-month stay in Moscow, Russia. And while we were there, I was representing our church on legal matters. And while we were there, the government over there passed a law that says you can't meet unless you get a permit. Now we meet here tonight. Isn't that great? How many appreciate that? In addition to that, there was another law passed that says non-governmental organizations, the government can walk in, slap you without a subpoena, without any prior notice, and say we want to audit all your records. And they did that, including churches. Okay? However, earlier they passed a law with a very, very good constitutional wording, but some of those government people don't recognize that right. Unfortunately, we still have that right here. And we were mighty happy to get back on American soil where we have the rights that we have. So, and to be argumentative tonight, we're going to try to avoid that. But what we want to do is have the panel members express their views about all the different aspects of the Common Core. Now, we're going to have to ask him questions because we don't want to duplicate questions, because it'll take quite a while to have the panel members speak on the different issues. If, by chance, one panel member covers the position well, the other panel member can pass or simply comment, I agree or disagree, or make further statements. So we don't. They have the option. If they pass, it doesn't mean they agree or disagree. It means that the issue's been covered. Okay. So let's start right here. Yeah. Questions? Yeah. Yeah. Let's check that.
We're going to see if this is going to work as a second mic. Can everybody hear that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll share this one at this end of the table.
Okay. Great, that'll help. Now, let's have the panel kind of start on this end. Ed Schumacher from Council, or Cambridge. He'll introduce himself and tell a little of his experience and background, and then we'll move down from there, okay?
I'm Ed Schumacher, the superintendent from Cambridge. I'm in my 7th year there. I spent 25 years in education in Oregon. I think I've been a superintendent for about 28 years. So I've got some experience in that. I hope that helps.
My name is Bruce Cook. I just got into town not long ago from Rexburg, Idaho. I work with the Madison School District there. Currently in overseeing all the curriculum, the testing, and staff development.
I'm Stephanie Zimmerman. I am the mother of 8 children. That's where my experience begins, and it'll go on from there. I have spent the last 2 or so years researching Common Core and looking into how it affects Idaho.
I'm going to use my microphone, thanks. My name is Valerie Candelaria. I currently serve as the president of the 912 Project of Idaho. We're a nonpartisan citizens advocacy group, and our focus changes based on whatever is issues that are important to the community at the time. More than a year ago, Stephanie and I began working together as we researched and learned all about Common Core. In my other life, I work at an accounting firm, and I am a data person. I'm an IT person, so I have a good perspective on that. Thank you.
I kind of feel like the ugly stepchild up here. These people have a lot of experience, I don't. I'm a math teacher here at Payette High School. I teach in the classroom. This is my 3rd year teaching. Before that, I did construction for a lot of years. But I have, experience in the classroom, looking at how this is affecting the students, what's going on with it. To be honest, I don't know as much about it as I should, and probably not as much as some of you do, but I'll do the best I can up here. You don't want to know. I'm Michael Thomas.
Thank you. There was a hearing before the State Education Committee, and a number of questions were submitted to them. And so we'll start with some of those questions because it's kind of an overview of the background of this law.
Okay, if you want to start with that, that's
Is it not picking up? Okay. If Common Core is a state law-led effort, why is it funded at the federal level in addition to private corporation funds? Question. Panel? Let's start right here with that.
I guess I don't know how to answer the question because I guess I question the accuracy of the statement.
So my take on that was that, when Common Core was introduced, I don't remember having these kind of public forums. And I don't remember having parents give some input. I don't know which Idaho teachers helped develop these standards, but I do remember seeing a pushy agenda in that in order to get in line for the race to the top funding, then Idaho needed to hurry and adopt the standards so that we'd be eligible for that money. More than that, I'm not quite sure. I think I've missed, if there were these public meetings and Idaho teacher input, I missed it somewhere.
And I would just add quickly that Common Core, like so many federal programs, we're getting $10 to implement a $25 program. In the long run, it's going to end up costing our state a lot more money than we are ever going to receive from the federal government to implement this.
What I would like to add to that is the actual funding for Common Core, the development, the implementation, the promotion, the staff development. A lot of the funding has come from corporate origins. Largely, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been the primary funders of a lot of different phases of Common Core. When you're talking about the standards themselves, there's really a lot more to the Common Core program than just standards. And there's a lot of money behind some of the data aspects, a lot of money behind the origin of the plan, really. Race to the Top wasn't the complete origin of everything in this plan, but if we're talking about standards, that would be a different matter. There's a lot more. I'm hoping we get to talk about that tonight.
I'm going to pass.
Next question. If Idaho doesn't agree with all proposed standards, can they adopt the standards to fit their needs? And if so, how? Bruce, you want to start?
So there is a little bit of a mechanism for Idaho to change some of these, but the problem is that it really doesn't lie with the local school board. The standards can be looked at, revised up to 15% of the standards, but it needs to go through legislature. And so we're having legislature look at those standards when, in my opinion, really ought to include our local school boards and let them do the job that they were elected to do, to find out what curriculum makes sense for our community, what's the best for our kids. So.
And just quickly, if we want to change the standards, we have to first get out of the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. That is the enforcement arm for Common Core. There is a test that when this testing consortium came together, they received a federal grant specifically to write a test to the Common Core standards. If our children are going to be taking that test, and if our teachers are going to be evaluated and paid according to how the students perform on this test, they are going to be teaching to these standards and to this test. There is also a 5-step process in order to get out of the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. The 5th step involves getting permission from the Federal Department of Education.
So the only thing I'll add to that conversation is that should we be successful in exiting the SBAC, the consortium, and we then have the opportunity to look elsewhere for standards. One of the things that we have done in our efforts over the past year is to try and find suitable alternatives. And we know of some that are superior to Common Core and have been scored that way according to Fordham. That would include the California Math Standards as well as the Massachusetts English Language Arts Standards. Both of them are available. And the only other thing to add would be a clarification that Tom Luna requested of the Attorney General's office back in April of last year, I believe, to find out if a district could adopt standards separately from what the state has adopted. And the bottom line stance, or the bottom line answer to that question, was that a district could indeed, so long as they exceeded using the states as a minimum, as long as they were equal to or greater than the state standards, that a district was free to do that. But of course, there's no incentive to do that because of the test right now. So I don't know. We hope for alternatives.
Well, I kind of agree with what they're saying. If we can adopt different standards, but as long as everything's based on this test, it doesn't help us to adopt different standards, because our kids are going to be judged according to the test that they're giving us. Are there better standards out there? For sure. Are there worse standards out there? Yes. Did Common Core do some better things than what we had? Probably. So, I think a lot of times we're kind of down on the whole Common Core thing. It kind of got shoved down our throats. Did it improve some things? For sure. There are things that needed to be changed. Do I like it all? No. So I think, just to say that Common Core is bad is, we can't go there. There are some good things in Common Core. There's some good things about it. It could be improved, but as long as we're stuck with this test, we've got to teach so that our kids can pass the test. I mean, that's what we're judged off of. So I think that's where we need to be looking.
As far as teaching to the test or the standards, that's kind of the point of a standard. I think that's what's different about education now. And when I went to school, we graded on a curve and tried to sort kids. But setting a standard is setting a line that everyone needs to cross. Well, if everyone needs to cross, then you ought to teach to that line. That only makes sense to me. I don't know why we would do anything else. As far as, I think whether or not the Common Core meets the mark is really in one of the statements that Senator Pearce shared with us is this all exists so that we can compare Idaho with other states and other countries. If we're going to compare to other people, it would seem like we'd want to use a common curriculum. I wouldn't know why we would want to use a different curriculum to be compared to everybody else, unless we don't care where we rank. But that seems to be really important, where we rank. So if you want to rank at the top, then you'd want to know what everybody else is teaching, or teach similar to that, so you'd have a chance to be at the top. That requires a standard.
The next question, this card has several questions, so I'm going to ask, and maybe change it just a little bit. Why is the state standpoint that we can't opt out of testing? That's a question. Can we, I'm going to change it, can we opt out of testing?
Due to No Child Left Behind, the state is supposed to test a certain percentage of students. When you look at Idaho policy, though, the SBAC is not mentioned as our test in the policy. Legally, can you opt your children out? Absolutely. There is no legal barrier to doing that. In fact, it's a parental right that you can do that. Policy states that they have to test a certain number of students, though.
So if you don't want your children to take the test, though, that is an absolute parental right.
All I can say is that there is a movement going on across the nation about doing just exactly that. You know, a lot of the people who've been resisting the test or resisting Common Core and are fearful of whatever nature that comes with it aren't making a lot of headway yet with the legislature. So this is a movement that has grown over the course of the last 6 months even.
I'll just say I hate to pass all the time, but when it comes to the political aspect of things, or whether this is legal or that's legal, I'm going to have to bow out to my colleagues. I don't know much about it. I know what happens in classrooms, not too much about the political or legal aspects. So I'm going to pass.
Have you heard about the mother that was arrested in California for locking her child out?
Hold up. We're not going to go there. We've got to keep this, and we know that there are those things out there.
Arrested?
And so we haven't got the position. In other words, some of us are fairly emotional about this, and we understand. But if we go there, we don't get the information out from these people who supposedly have a position in Idaho that can help influence what happens in Idaho. In other words, what happens in California won't necessarily happen here if we get the proper legislation and we have proper school administration. But that can happen. So appreciate your concern, but we got to put a break on there. And there's a couple of questions, but we need to hear from the rest of the panel on that last question. Okay.
As I understand the rules, a district cannot tell a parent you don't have to test your child. Whether or not if the parent sends the child to school on that day would be a parent's prerogative, or they can take the child out of school. But I don't believe the district can say, no, your child doesn't have to be tested.
So, can you opt out? The No Child Left Behind law does say that Idaho has to test. We have to give a test to kids in the 3rd through the 8th grade, and then once in high school, measuring how well we're teaching the Common Core standards. It doesn't mention the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. It doesn't tell us exactly which test we have to take. It doesn't say the length of time. And that's one of the things that there's a growing number of educators that are saying, can we look at another test? Why not just use the SAT? The SAT is already in place. We don't have to pay millions of dollars, and it's something that's accepted. The colleges know what it is. The colleges aren't looking for SA or SBAC tests to get admittance. The most that they'll use the SBAC for is to look at class schedules after a kid is admitted. And so that's all we're saying. But can you opt them out? The word from the State Department of Education has been, we encourage all parents to take this test, strongly encourage. And if you don't, then your option would be to homeschool. The word to the districts is, we have to offer the test, and we're offering the test. We don't advertise that parents don't take the test, but when a parent comes into the district office or into their principal and says, I'm refusing to let Scott and Jane take this test, I'm not going to do it, then they can have their kids stay home. I've asked specifically this week on Wednesday, some of the chief staff in the State Department of Education, this exact same topic. And what they say is, well, the consequence for this year really is null. There really isn't one, because obviously if Madison School District doesn't get 95% of our kids tested, then we fall below the 95% threshold of participation, which then on normal years would drop Madison's star ratings, which would mean that Madison has to do more reports to the State Department and more sanctions. And then they said in a normal year, then there possibly will be withholding of funding. So I asked 2 specific top officials about the withholding of funding, and there was no specific answer. They said, well, we'll have to get back to you. Not for sure. But this is your only free year. Next year, we're not in a field test, and then therefore the district will be held to the 95% participation rate. If parents don't like it, we've never had a policy to opt parents out, is what you'll hear from the State Department. We haven't had one before, we don't have one now, and if they don't like it, then the option would be homeschool.
There's been a number of referrals to an acronym SBAC. Can you explain what that is for the audience?
SBAC is the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium tests in English language arts and in math. And there's also a practice, a classroom activity and a practice or a performance task for each one of those. So when we say SBAC, it's just our easy way of saying the test that's required of all Idaho schools to take, that we're taking to measure how well we're teaching the Common Core standards. Idaho is in a consortium of, I can't remember, 24 or so states. There's another consortium called PARC, very similar, another group of states taking that.
Any other comments by
I was going to mention the fact that it's just one of two national consortiums, that there is a national law. It's illegal for the federal government to have one national test for all students. And so this, by forming two separate testing consortia, you find yourself free of that law. You're not held to that standard or that restriction. And the fact that the tests that are being developed are quite similar to achieve the objective of sharing results and comparative use across states, you've essentially achieved a national test, even though we have two separate consortia.
Any other comments from anybody else on that? Okay, the next question is there any research or any background regarding Common Core, where Common Core was used as a pilot program or as a test program?
I guess I'll jump in here. No, there is nowhere in the United States that Common Core has been piloted. In fact, a gentleman by the name of Christopher Tinkin, he is from Seton Hall, PhD in school administration. He calls Common Core dataless decision making. This was a program that was developed and then thrown wholesale onto the schools across the nation without any piloting or testing anywhere in the nation.
Any other comments?
I'll say a little something. Common Core as a whole has obviously never been piloted or tested. Many parts of Common Core were tested, researched. I know the National Council for the Teachers of Mathematics did a lot of the standard writing for Common Core, and many of the parts that they tried to implement in there were tested. But as a whole, no, Common Core has not been piloted or tested.
Could I jump in just a minute? What are the good points and the bad points that you see as a teacher?
There's other comments on that question. Let's not jump to the next question.
So I agree with both of the comments, actually. The Common Core, there's portions of them that they're informed by universal tests where they took some of the standards from other high-performing nations, saw what they were trying to do, found the standards. But as far as locally, I haven't heard of anything in the States where they actually ran a pilot with these to help make sure that these standards will make kids more ready for college or more ready for careers. But I just haven't run through it. I think they've had time to do that. You will hear at times a teacher say, I love the Common Core standards because I'm seeing the kids grow in my class. I'm seeing them grow. But my question to that would be, did they grow in your class before Common Core? Was there no growth before and then Common Core came and now there's this tremendous growth? Or were they growing before as well and Common Core are a higher standard? They're more rigorous by about 2 grade levels across the board. Not always, but about 2. And so, of course we want high expectations for kids. We just want high realistic expectations. High expectations that are unrealistic create frustration and then people just quit and say, I can't do it, I'm gonna leave it. So high realistic expectations, we're all for that.
Any other comments? Any other comments on that? Okay, next question. How does Common Core accommodate the differences in intellectual abilities of the students?
I think it's,
Yeah.
That's one of the criticisms of the Common Core, in that it does not provide for the different achievement levels. That everybody is expected to learn exactly the same thing in exactly the same way at exactly the same time, and those that struggle anyway are likely to struggle even more so under these standards, and those that are high achievers are held back by the fact that they have the pack has to be, the whole classroom has to progress at the same level. Now, I'm not an educator, I'm not in the classroom, so these are simply opinions that I'm sharing with you from those who have spoken out on exactly this issue. It's meant to bring everybody to the middle.
Guess this is where I get to jump in. Yes and no, I'm going to disagree a little bit. One thing that we found, and this kind of answers your question that you jumped in with, especially in math, and probably in a lot of subjects, we have what we call the regurgitation method, or the, put it a little bit more bluntly, the binge and purge method. We jam a bunch of information in their head, have them spew it out on the test. If they can spew it out correctly, we call them good students and we pass them. If they can't, we call them bad students and we hold them back. That very much focuses on one type of learning style. I know college was very much that way. I know, that's the way we teach. We feed them all this information, and as long as they can see the method we're using and regurgitate it to us and do a few problems and say, yep, there, I know how to do that, we call them good. And that very much limits who we call good and who we don't, because there are certain students that are really good at that and certain students that aren't. One thing Common Core does is makes them think a little bit. This is one thing I actually like about Common Core, is that I've got some of those really top students, the ones that can ace every one of my tests. And I hand them a word problem or hand them something that requires them to use what they did, and they just stare at me blankly like, I have no idea what you're even talking about right now. And I really, I could name names about students, and I'm not going to, don't worry, Mr. Helker, I'm not going to name names. I could give you specific examples of students that can get 100% on a test, and if I hand them an actual problem, that it doesn't translate. They can't go from doing the math to using the math. And Common Core is trying to bridge that gap a little bit, trying to get more involved in projects, trying to get them involved more in thinking of how this actually works instead of just that it does work. So that is one thing that is good about Common Core, and actually levels the playing field, because some of those kids that we consider lower achieving can actually work their way backwards through things and come to an answer that isn't the method that we necessarily teach, but they can get an answer by thinking through it. And what Common Core does is try and encourage more of those different paths to the answer, instead of just saying, here's the path, regurgitate it. So there are some good things about Common Core. There are some things that some of these students will really benefit from, because we're helping them learn different ways and helping them try different things.
I'd like to state that the Idaho Math Initiative that's been in effect for quite a long time, we're still at phase 1 of phase 3, where I think we've been for about 6 years, actually was designed to have students learn math differently, which really preceded our big investment into Common Core. So the need to teach math differently has been around for quite some time, and the strategies are quite effective. I think we've stopped teaching math and we've started making mathematicians. As far as why there aren't different standards for different level of kids, I don't think that's the purpose of standards at all. So do the standards accommodate students with disabilities? The standard is to decide what the level of proficiency is, regardless of who the student is. As far as how it locks teachers in, teachers still have to take kids from where they are to where they need to be. A teacher that would not differentiate for their students because of Common Core, I would think would not be competent. That they still need to teach the students at the level that the student can learn toward getting to the level of proficiency or whatever the standard is. One comment I'd like to make, I spent a little bit of time this morning on the Idahoans for Local Education website, and one of the questions asked on there is why would some of the developers of the Common Core not adopt it later? And two of those people were from Massachusetts, and they both commented that the standards were way too low. And we just heard that the standards were way too high. I find it difficult to be too low and too high at the same time.
So I agree with lots of what was said here. Probably the only other comment would be that as far as remediation in the Common Core, if a kid has a disability, they still have Title I services, they still have special ed services. If a student is excelling, most schools have gifted and talented programs, and so to differentiate for each child is a tricky business. It's tough. It's hard to explain what that's like if you haven't had to try and do that and take 30 kids individually at different levels. And if I'm teaching 6th grade math and I have one in 4th grade, I'm supposed to teach him 6th grade stuff plus get him caught up. And I guess I disagree a lot with that the Common Core standards are lower than what we previously had. We're giving the SBAC test now, and the standards are evident that they're a lot more rigorous, they're a lot higher.
Is that all? Okay. Let's back up a little bit, because some here know, but others don't. Just like to have the panel explain the process that brought Common Core to Idaho. Okay? In other words, what is being done with the test results and so forth. I think that's two different questions. But kind of give us, the audience, the background of how this Common Core came into being and why we have it, and what was the intent to accomplish. So.
Well, that's an awful lot for one question. The intent is a separate issue. I would like to start out by explaining just the origin and the series of events that have occurred. We, as has said earlier, Race to the Top was the origin of all of this, but it really goes back prior to that. The stimulus bill in February of 2009 included $100 billion earmarked for education reform. Out of the $800 billion, there was $100 billion for education reform, and of that funding, $54 billion was set aside for the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. And within the guidelines or the requirements for a grant application from states, you had to agree to 4 assurances. And those were college and career ready standards and the assessments. They were enhanced data systems. They were teacher evaluations and distribution. They didn't want all the good teachers in the suburbs. And then the last one was to turn over low-performing schools. Those were the criteria that you had to adhere to in your application. That $100 billion included $4.35 billion for the Race to the Top program. The Race to the Top program was a competitive grant where points were awarded for everything you did in there that they were wanting you to do. Again, just like in the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, the 4 assurances were a requirement for your grant application for Race to the Top. This is the only place I've ever seen the words actually used that these were 4 mandatory assurances. It was, there were a couple of different phases for Race to the Top, but the 4 assurances were a common theme between the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund and Race to the Top. And then thereafter, we had a No Child Left Behind waiver that again emphasized these 4 assurances. So to say that the standards are not related to the data applications and the data collection efforts and teacher evaluations, and I mean, it's all kind of rolled into one big package. And the truth is that those 4 assurances were first, in my reading, originated in January 2007 in a bill called the America Competes Act, where they were intending, the Federal Department of Education was intending to promote the studies of physical sciences and math and technology. So it kind of all just has flowed from there, and it certainly predates anything that we have heard about states getting together in the room deciding to do standards. We did not get any race to the top money. Our grant application was quite voluminous when it was sent in, and we did everything right, crossed all the T's, dotted the I's, still didn't get any money. Of the 45 or 46 states that applied for money, there were only about 12, or I think there were 12 that actually got any money. But we all agreed to the standards by our signatures on these applications. We made promises. The commitments were made. We did get state fiscal stabilization funding, though. I believe I understood our requests were for about $491 million. We actually received $247 million. And a big percentage of that, I can't remember, it was 60%, went for these 4 mandatory assurances. Part of the fiscal stabilization money was used to enhance our student data systems. There were 2 separate phases of that funding. So this all kind of goes together. And I hope we get an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the data systems, because that's one of the primary concerns among parents and opposition around the country.
Yeah, we need to hold the answers a little bit shorter, because we're going to run out of time, okay? But go ahead, there's more to respond on that question.
No, I was just going to state and to make sure that Common Core is not just a set of standards. One thing that needs to be made clear is that there's actually 4 pillars to this education reform, and every document that you read that involves the common standards and assessments involves the other 3 pillars. And everywhere that we applied for money, we did apply for the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, we got that money there. We did apply for Race to the Top, we didn't get anything there, so you're going to hear that we didn't receive any money to implement Common Core. However, in order to even apply for Race to the Top, our State Fiscal Stabilization Fund had to be approved. So in that sense, we have received money to implement these standards, and that's how we ended up with them in Idaho.
So I'm going to pass on the first part of the question. I don't know as much as what you've been hearing already. The second part of that question, something about what are the scores going to be used for? Did I hear that right? And so with the SBAC, it's hard to talk about Common Core without talking about the testing, the assessment that's going to come with it. I agree, there's some things in the Common Core we totally support. MTI strategies, or mathematical thinking for instruction strategies that Mike was talking about earlier, totally support it. We were on board with that years ago. But it's hard to talk about Common Core without how we're going to assess if we're teaching Common Core, and then what happens with those scores. And so, what's going to happen with the scores? I think it's a federal compliance thing. The state of Idaho needs to send back in. We applied for a waiver. I haven't worked on that project. I've had plenty of other things on my plate. I haven't tried not to worry about that too much. But so we applied for the waiver. We got accepted in the waiver, and we have to show that we're complying with an assessment. But then again, the law doesn't say it has to be this assessment. As a matter of fact, 9 of your superintendents from this area have sent forth to the State Department of Education a letter and had a private meeting with Tom Luna about, can we suggest another test? From the NWEA, there's actually a test called MAP, Measure of Academic Progress. It's a shorter test, and it actually measures these standards. We don't have to pay the money. We can use the SAT in the 11th grade, it's already here. And so, and there's lots of, I just don't think people know a lot about it. We're so glad to have the opportunity to be here and talk about some of these things that you won't hear. It's hard to get this information unless you dig and you know where to start asking questions, because it's not freely being told.
Okay. There's been comments made about this data collection. So I'd just like to have the committee comment about the data collection that's been referred to in the Common Core program, okay? Let's start with you at this end, Ed.
Well, the data collection piece, I guess I'm more on the back end of that, and that we know we need to gather the data and use it. I know that a big argument in favor of the data collection was that as we move to a statewide or a nationwide curriculum, it would more facilitate students moving from one district to the next or one state to the next. I'm not sure that would be accomplished very well. I'm not terribly knowledgeable about all the intent. I understand concern about what might come of that or where that information might go. I don't really have a lot of expertise on how all that information is going to be handled. I know at the district level we're more involved with what we need to collect.
So I agree with Ed. Not for sure where the data is going. I just know we have to send in. It used to be that we had to send it in. You know, it used to be a couple years ago we would do a paper pencil report at the end of the year, and we sent several of those in. Then it came that we started the IC program, which are these electronic updates that we have to send in, and that was once a year. Now we're at once a month, where we're sending in data, and it's taken for Madison 2 full-time positions to try and collect that data and go through all the data. They have there's these reports that they have to go through, very time-consuming. One of our reports had 10,000 errors because we had a period wrong or an extra space or whatever it may be, and so we're trying to work through those. Is this a concern for parents? Absolutely. This is probably the biggest concern that we've heard from our school district is, how can I not have my data go to the State Department? And if they need data, can we just send the data that's only needed? So I started to look into this a little bit. If you go on the State Department of Education website, look under IC, there's actually, they're pretty open about this, in that it's listed on the website what data fields we have to send in for every student every month. I wrote some down. So this is off of there. We send in student and parent demographics. We send in all the contact information. We send in LEP or limited English proficient, special education students, and eligibility statuses, gifted and talented students, homeless statuses, Title I tutoring statuses, migrant statuses, race and ethnicity. We send in grades, obviously, and that's the one that we probably agree with, is we probably should be sending in grades. And so, but then it gets into, we're sending in free and reduced lunch status for parents, and we're sending in student data by name and by log entry. So if there are comments, it's not just Madison High School had 4 suspensions, but we're sending in, we're sending in all of the discipline notes, what happened, all of that goes up every month for every child. So this is a huge concern. Probably the biggest concern for parents is this one.
Somebody kick me when my 2 minutes is up, and I'll hand the mic to Val, because this is a huge issue. It is illegal for the federal government to have a national database. So what they did is they went around that, and they gave individual states grants to form their own identical, across 50 states, databases. It originated with what, in Idaho anyway, with what was called the P20. That was going to track your child from preschool through 20 years of school. Now, some states have moved that P back from preschool, and in the state of Oregon, the P stands for prenatal. So we got that first grant. Then we got a second grant to add workforce tracking. So we now have a P20W system where it will track your child from preschool clear through the workforce. So as Bruce mentioned, when the state is going to tell you they always collected data, and they did to a certain extent collect certain types of data. The difference being now the amount of data and whether or not they can identify a student by that data. It used to be aggregate data or summaries, and everybody was lumped together. Now it's disaggregate. Part of the problem with that is that there have been changes made to the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. That was the policy or the law, it was a law, that protected your students' data. It stated that data could not be collected without parental permission, and it stated that there was certain types of data that could not be collected at all, and it redefined some things like who had permission to have access to that data. So now anybody with an educational purpose can have access to the data. A vendor, someone like Microsoft, has an educational purpose. They can have access to your child's data now. I've also heard that, as Bruce mentioned, there are schools that have not had one clean download into the IC system. And so if they're putting data in it and it's coming back out inaccurate, then that causes problems. I think my 2 minutes is up, so I'll let Val what I had to say.
Yeah, I think the data aspects really are some of the greatest concerns that parents have across the country. Not only do we upload a lot more data than we have ever uploaded before, there's also data sharing between state agencies at present, something that we weren't aware of, that the student data is now shared with the Department of Transportation, and through their DMV now is attaching Social Security numbers to that, and sharing it further with the Department of Labor. And we know this because one of the parents in our group, her student got an ID card from the Department of Labor. He was only in 8th grade. You know, he doesn't drive. He never held a job, but his data somehow made its way over to the Department of Labor. And when we looked at the card, it has the Career Information System logo on it. And as I understand this, the program used to be administered by the school systems, and that sometime when we established this data sharing agreement is now administered by the Department of Labor, with the intent in that keeping that cumulative data record for the entire life of the student and into the workforce. They want to know where they went to the school, what they studied, how they did. Did you stay in school? Did you go to advanced studies? Did you work? How did you do? Did you change jobs? Where do you live? I mean, all of this is a cumulative database. And I told you early on that I'm a data person, and I understand the power of the data. This is a big, big problem, and this is a big part of the incentive that some of the corporate interests have in putting so much money behind this. In fact, I have to tell you just a couple of things about the funding, because I'm not sure I'll get another opportunity. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has financed so much of this. $300 million we've tracked just in the last several years. A big part of that was about data. In fact, he just spent seed money to start a database management company, because they're just waiting for all of this data. And the other thing is that Bill Gates has also founded the two organizations that are supposedly the face of the state-led effort, the National Governors Association and the Chief of State, the Council of Chief State School Officers, have funded those organizations heavily. National Governors Association has received about $26 million, and it started back just prior to all of this new wave to increase college readiness and graduation rates. So the theme was established there. The CCSSO has received $80 million from Bill Gates, and the starting effort there was to engage. There were two phases of funding to work with the National Data Education Statistic. I don't remember what the organization is. I don't have my notes so handy. But it was about increasing access to student data. So these themes are a real undercurrent for Common Core. I think the standards are the least of our concerns, really. I mean, there are education people out there that would, find some holes in the standards themselves, but really this is a great concern, this data is. I can't think of anything else I left out. That ought to be enough to start with.
All right, I'm going to argue again just for fun. And she obviously knows this. You can't make a decision without data. Now, it sounds like they're getting way more data than they need, but you can't make a decision without data. We're saying, well, we need to improve our standards. We need to, make better decisions. We can't do that unless we know what's going on. So part of that whole deal to gather all this data is so that we can look at the data and make good decisions. If we tell them we refuse to gather any data, then we were never going to make a good decision. So are we going overboard? Quite possibly. We tend to do that all the time. But if we go the opposite extreme, we're not going to get anywhere.
Was Common Core adopted in Idaho by the legislature? Monty, you might be able to answer that better than most of us. We understand that the Governors Association and the Chief of State School Officers put together this Common Core and presented it. I think Governor Otter signed and the State Superintendent of Schools signed. What happened in the legislature after?
It was brought to us in the form of a rule. I don't know if you understand how rules happen, but the legislature passes laws, and then the agency that they pass that law that's related to it writes the rules to put the law into full effect and to take care of the little minute details that may not be in the bill. Well, the State Board of Education comes to the legislature's committees and says, this is what our education policy will be, this is what we want done, this is the rule we make. And so they brought us Common Core. No name of Common Core was given, it was simply, these are some new standards. Well, we looked at them and said, you guys are the specialists. If you tell us these standards are better, we will accept that. Then later, after that was passed, almost a year later, we were hearing about Common Core, and we had passed that. Without ever being told this was Common Core, and we were not informed that this was a government program. I think that's one thing that hasn't been announced even tonight. $361 million was given by the federal government to influence these tests. You and I both know that when the federal government gives any money, it has strings attached. You do it our way. Well, part is one of the consortiums for the testing and SBAC both received almost equal amounts, like around $170 million apiece. And that's what has driven and brought that. And so that, I hope I answered your question well, but that's how it came to the legislature. That's why we had that hearing this year, because we were concerned saying, what have we got into? What have we walked into? And then we realized all the implications that come along with the testing, the database. I think one thing I want to comment, I'm sorry to take more time, but these two gals on here know about that data. I was a sponsor on a bill this year that limited the data that could leave the state of Idaho. We tried our darndest to get the right legislation through that would protect your children, because we don't want them on a national database with every little infraction they've ever done in their life there from the time they're kindergarten to the time they're retired. Because that's really what they're going to do, is track us all the way through. That's the initial plan. And we tried to put the best we could to put a lid on that so that wouldn't come and be there.
And did that law pass?
Yes.
Yeah, if there's any more questions, hold them up and give them. And we're trying to consolidate, and hopefully consolidate so we don't duplicate the questions. It says here that I've heard that Common Core is pushing kids to learn at a younger level things that may not be, they may not be capable of learning due to developmental stages. What is your thought on this? Are you for or against Common Core? I think we've covered that, but the question is the increased standard within the capability and learning ability of our students? Take that.
But I get to start. That's one of my biggest problems with Common Core, honestly. And I've heard people say, well, nobody can point at a specific standard and say that one's a problem. Well, I can. They have taken the algebra curriculum, like they said, things are about 2 years ahead of where they were. The standards have moved up about 2 years, which means instead of algebra as a freshman in high school, they're taking algebra as a 7th grader. Most of algebra is now covered in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The problem I have with that is brain development doesn't begin to develop the abstract thinking until about 14 or 15 years old. So we can legislate all we want that these kids have to learn algebra in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but I don't know how you legislate brain development. That's a problem. If we could legislate that, that'd be a good thing, right? So yes, is there a problem with it? I believe yes, that there's a problem with that. You can't just tell them they have to learn it when they're not ready to learn it. I know high schoolers that have not developed to the point where they can understand algebra. And that's not, I'm not trying to be mean. Brain development happens at different times for different students. And to just tell them they all have to do it at this age, it doesn't work. So, anyway.
I would agree with that. In the elementary school, we see that some of the concepts or ideas are just very difficult for students to get their head around. And certainly we introduce and do the best we can, but a lot of that is ahead of their abilities to grasp the concept.
I agree with both those comments, totally agree.
I've got 2 mics. I'm going to use, Bruce has heard this before, but I'm going to use an analogy just real quick, and since I'm a mom and I've got kids, I'm going to use a slinky. You pick up a slinky and you hold it like this, and down at the bottom, everything is really packed together, and things up at the top are a little wider. This is how one person described the Common Core math standards in particular. Down at the bottom, everything is packed way too close, and the children, no matter how hard you try to teach, young children an algebraic, not a thinking, they're just not going to get it. But you get up to the higher grades, and Common Core tends to split things too far apart and isn't pushing kids fast enough. But there are lots of child development specialists that will tell you that the Common Core standards are completely inappropriate, particularly for younger ages.
I don't have a lot to add to that, because remember, I'm not an educator. But I did watch a video from a child psychologist who spoke exactly to that problem, that the children, especially in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, aren't developmentally able to follow some of the concepts and the thinking that is required of them to do their process. So it's creating unnecessary stress. It's creating disappointment. Kids are discouraged, and the one thing you don't want to do with youngsters is to kill that love of learning. I think that's a real threat here, I guess, for challenging to beyond the abilities of the younger students.
What are we doing with the
with the SBAC testing that started, how are the younger ages and responding to that?
Are we seeing the younger ages? Do we have a test that's given to these younger ages that are beyond their ability? How are they responding?
So we're in our first week. We're just finishing up our first week of taking the field test for the SBAC. And it's given third grade, so it goes as young as the third grade. And all of our elementary schools, I believe, are finishing up their ELA, or English Language Arts tests. And so I asked specifically to the principals and to the test proctors, how's it going? And the comments, I haven't had anybody say, I really like this test, it makes sense. Most say the process is clunky, obviously it's new, we're not used to a lot of what this is, or the process for starting tests and things. We knew that would be, with any test, we'd have to learn the process. But as far as, is it too hard? Hearing comments that child, we gave it for 45 minutes. So in Madison, we decided we're going to try and do due diligence by letting the kids take the field test, but we're not going to try and make them finish. The test, if we follow the guidelines, it's 7 hours for third graders to get through those tests. And in the high school, it's 8.5 hours. It's not all at once, it's not in one sitting, but that's the length of these tests. It's longer than a certification for our teachers. So we have kids, we gave it to them.
Probably more rigorous too. I couldn't believe that.
I have so many stories for you. But the younger grades, so a lot of the kids, we had a lot of kids not even getting close to finishing the tests. They're coming out, a lot of frustration. The test proctors say, "Are you sure this is the right? You sure this is the right test we should be doing?" The general comments, the test questions seem too high. The questions on the test, some of them are 3- and 4-step processes to get through the question, so it's very difficult to follow through that. Third graders, as far as, they're going to have to know typing skills, because on their performance task there's typing of essays, and we're not writing those anymore, it's typing, so we're now testing typing skills for the third graders. So it's clunky, to say the least.
Okay, if we're,
I'm sorry, I'll be fast.
okay, go ahead.
I did want to share one thing that Idaho is still pretty early in this process, and so one of the things that we do when we do our research is read from states who are further along. New York State, for example, is 2 years into this, further than us. And one of the things that was released in November last year was a letter signed by 545 principals across the state of New York. And one of the big problems they had is with the testing itself. And what they said, basically in their own experience, is that the tests were way too long, and that many of the students were unable to complete them. They were suffering mental exhaustion, and some students were even responding viscerally. The examples they gave are that many children cried during or after testing. Now this obviously would be the younger students. Others vomited or lost control of their bowels or bladders, or simply gave up. And there was a testing talk website that I was reading on the other day that said that some of the students, I think the example given is one student said, "Yeah, I just answered C for all of them," because they don't want to bother with it. It's too difficult, and a lot of students spent more time looking back, referencing, because the test questions asked them for specific page numbers or line numbers or something like that. They had to keep referring back to the document, and it's slow and tedious. So I think the experience so far from other states who are further along is not so great.
One interesting thing about what she just said, if they answered C for all of them, this isn't a multiple choice test anymore. So that would be an interesting way to answer an essay. Although I gave my students, I went in and there were 8 practice questions online. My students into the computer lab every class and had them do it, and some of them probably answered C for all of them, even though you can't. Well, that is one thing I've heard. We've tested the freshmen. This week we tested the freshmen. They had 2 days of English language arts and then 2 days of math. I got comments all the way from, I didn't even know what they were talking about, so I just gave up, to that test wasn't really that hard. So I've heard the whole spectrum. Ones that said it wasn't that hard, I don't know, maybe they didn't know what was going on. One problem I do have with the testing, and I've mentioned this, in some of our meetings, it doesn't affect some teachers because, for example, a 9th grade English teacher misses 1 week because, the 9th graders test for 1 week, and so he might miss a week. And the way we've done it in the school is, we're doing it by last names, so one morning it might be A through J, and then in the afternoon it'll be K through Z, and then the next day they'll do K through Z in the morning and A through J in the afternoon. So they're really only missing 2 days of a class per week. Problem is, I teach geometry and I have anywhere from 9th graders to 12th graders in every single class. And so for the month of April, I don't have a full class for the month of April. I'm missing about kids will be missing class every day for a month. And that makes it hard to keep going. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff I need to cover, and it hasn't been so hard or so bad. It hasn't been too bad yet, but it is hard. I mean, I've got kids missing class, every day, and I just keep going and hope they can keep up. So on top of the test, they have to come in and get their work and keep up with math class too. So it makes it hard. This whole testing thing is difficult. It takes a lot of time that we are supposed to be teaching them what they're supposed to be doing. We have to spend it testing them to see if they learned. So, like I said, I've heard good and bad about the test from the students, but it does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of time out of our teaching and what we're able to do in the classroom.
Any other comments? What kind of cost of the school is faced with this kind of testing? I think that it's obvious that there's some costs associated, and in particular with computer labs that weren't being used before, and the school's equipped to cover those.
I'm gonna jump in because we're obviously in it. The first thing that we noticed with costs was just trying to teach the standards. It's hard to, when the Common Core standards were adopted, vendors really weren't ready for that, the text vendors. So it was hard to find a book that would match up to the new standards, and we weren't given any new money for curriculum, and so we're asking teachers who are really good lesson planners, you have to give them credit for what they are asked to do, to differentiate for 30 kids in all these ranges. And now we're saying, go on open sources, go on the internet, find out what you need, bring down what you need. Teachers are good at lesson planning, but we haven't trained them building a textbook. And so it's difficult for them and unfair to our teachers for that. That was our first cost, was just trying, we did adopt some math books in Madison. We bought 7th and 8th grade math books. They don't match well. They're better than what we had, but we realized that was a Band-Aid approach. We're gonna have to spend a lot more money. And as far as the test goes, it really hasn't cost us, as far as technology, what it's cost us is getting enough technology in the school to take that many kids through that many sessions of the SBAC test. Because to do it the way that the SBAC suggests, classes are supposed to take the first CAT test, or the computer adaptive test, in 2 sessions. And then they're supposed to take a classroom activity where they don't need a computer, but then they go back to the computer and do their performance test in 2 sessions. And then they do it again for math. Except for math only has 1 session on the performance side. But so there's these different sessions that all these classes are supposed to go through. And we're trying to figure out, how are we supposed to do that? And then SBAC said, oh, by the way, during the testing window, there's 2 Thursdays and 2 Fridays that we're just gonna shut down for our maintenance. And so to build a schedule around that is extremely stressful. And so we just purchased a bunch of iPads. We had some before, we purchased them knowing we would need to bulk up. It helps us because we can instruct with them when we're allowed, and we have our kids to instruct. But right now, it's the latest was, it was with the test, the kids also are going to need to have headphones. there's portions of the ELA test that the kids are gonna have to listen to. You can't do that in an open lab. So now we're strapped with, you gotta go buy headphones, make sure every kid has a set of headphones. It's been difficult for us. We've actually, in our older grades, just said, can you please bring your own? We have some at the school. If you forget, we'll give you some, but can you help us out? And that's what we're just trying to limp through with that.
Just quickly, I'm going to address this. He knows more than I do. But everybody remember Prop 3 with the classroom technology and bringing in the computers in that? That's what this was for. I've been hearing from parents all across the state this week now that the testing has started, and I heard from one mother this morning talking about the amount of chaos that's going on in the school as they're trying to get kids in and out of rooms and of libraries where the computers are, because they're finding one computer lab doesn't have the capacity to get all the students through the tests. So that's why it was so important to have the one-to-one computer-student ratio. Also, if you look through, and I'm not an IT person, so this confuses me a little bit, but the one thing I did know, the IT requirements for SBAC are going to be greater than what our schools currently have in a few years. And so they're going to have to replace all the computers anyway and upgrade the systems. And there's also going to be a need for higher speed internet than what they currently have.
That was, the one thing I was going to add was about the capability of the machines themselves. SBAC testing is far more interactive and has heavier graphic requirements, more memory, more disk space, more processing speed. Everything it needs to be beefed up in order to perform even, minimally for the SBAC test. And most of the hardware that we have in place now that was to accommodate the requirements of ISAT were not nearly as intensive. And I think that the expectations, this is coming from Zev Warman, who is a software and assessment consultant from GWF Consulting in Palo Alto, California. He's the one that he took a look at the specs for our ISAT and compared that to the requirements for the SBAC testing and felt that it's unavoidable that at some point we're going to have some serious upgrades, and obviously that brings cost.
I don't know a whole lot about the actual money involved, but we have a couple computer labs here at Payette, and for the month of April, they're tied up. So we don't have access to them for a month. Our counselors are amazing. I don't know how they're getting this all accomplished, but they're doing a pretty good job running people in and out. We haven't had a whole lot of chaos as far as getting students in and out of the testing. They've done pretty well with that. But like I said, it ties them up also for a month. They're testing. They don't have a lot of time to do the other things that they need to do. Also, there was one, you mentioned the headphones. I just thought this was kind of funny. One of the kids was telling me, they had to listen to part of the ELA test. And this is one of my better students, and she said, it sounded like that teacher off of Peanuts, wah, 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 wah. She said, I couldn't understand a word it said, I just started putting the answers down. That's good. So, are there problems? Sure. As far as cost, yeah, it takes a lot of work to administer this test, and a lot of time and a lot of effort, and there's definitely cost involved.
We're probably a little better prepared than a lot of districts. We got some private grant money, so we actually have a one-to-one device for kindergarten through 12th grade. So all the kids do have an iPad they can use. We'll find out how well that works for the testing. As far as the bandwidth goes, once we got our iPads, we actually get our bandwidth through CTC, our private vendor. The bandwidth that's provided through the IEN would not even begin to manage. The state provided bandwidth is close to enough for us to run our one-to-one project. At one point in time, one day in Cambridge, we maxed out the entire bandwidth for the city of Cambridge. When we got our iPads up and running. And so they had to put some limitations. But we have adequate speed. We put in our own wireless network, which didn't cost us near what the state bid would have been. And I think we're probably going to get through that piece pretty well. And a lot of it's just numbers. We've only got 125 kids to test, so and each have their own device. So I don't think the cost was borne by a private entity. So.
Not everybody has a telephone in their circuit.
If I could just say one thing, that was another thing I was going to mention is, I don't think we've had a problem with bandwidth as far as having, I don't think we've had a problem with them not being able to test because they couldn't get on. And we upgraded ours this year also and did quite a bit with our system here. And it seems to be adequate for what we're doing.
I forgot to mention something that was important. One of the things that's different about the SBAC testing is that it's going to be performance-based items, open-ended questions. That's the design of this test, rather than multiple choice. And the performance-based items, the articles, the writings, the essays that they have to do, have to be manually scored. And one of the concerns about the manual scoring is we don't have any idea how much that's going to cost. And the only states in the nation that we're able to look back on and research was to find Kentucky, who did some performance-based testing back in the 90s and found that it was cost prohibitive. Their costs were huge. They were like $100 a test. Well, nowadays the estimate is considerably lower, but Superintendent Luna seems to think that we're going to get all the manual scoring for the SBAC testing with the same budget that we have for the ISAT. And that doesn't make sense if it has to be manually scored rather than having the computer do the scoring.
You referred to processing answers rather than multiple choice. So is that true that the process is as important as the answer? And if the math is correct, and the answer is correct, can the student still lose points if he or she does not explain the process? Do you understand the question?
I think I do. So yeah, on the computer, it's no more A, B, C, or D, and you click it and then move on. There might be one or two of those, but a lot of it is read the passage, move this sentence here, what one's first, what one's second. So you grabbing sentences and moving them around. Some of the math, it's even though it'll say things like Billy, here's how Billy did this algorithm, but he made a mistake. Go back through, find where he made the mistake, tell us what the correct answer is, and then tell us how you fix the mistake. So there's a lot of knowledge on what the process is and knowing how to do those mathematic problems with more than just knowing the traditional algorithm. You have to have some models that you have to understand to be able to do that and know the process. And as far as scores, I wish I could talk to you. We're not getting, we're not going to, it's a field test right now, so Smarter Balanced will keep these scores. I'm not for sure how many of the kids.
How much are they paying Idaho to get the test results from our whole state and not give us anything back? We're their guinea pigs.
Yeah, I don't know.
They should pay us for this.
My understanding, and I might be wrong on this one, but my understanding is not all of the kids in Idaho, their scores will be used to help set the cut scores or what the proficient level is versus a basic versus a below basic. I've heard 10%. I don't know if that's correct or not. So we'll go through the test as a practice. It's a field test. Up around 10%, I'm guessing, think it's a close guess, of Idaho's kids will be thrown into the consortium. They'll look at those tests, the scores, they validate the test questions, they set the cut scores, and we're not going to get any data this year, none.
So why are we paying them? Why are they paying us?
Well, I'm on the con side of the table here.
Any other comments on that?
Can I just add to that? Sorry, but to clarify the question, and I didn't write this question, but when homework is coming home from school and there's 3 cards with 9 dots and a child writes 9 times 3 and it's marked wrong, but if you write 3 times 9, it's marked correct. So it's the same math problem, but it's marked wrong. I believe that's what they're talking about.
Right. I interpreted that question not to be about the testing, but about the actual day-to-day lessons. And a lot of, we've all seen these worksheets on the internet. We've seen photos of all these lessons and just make you scratch your head and wonder what what the purpose is. The emphasis is indeed more about the process than it is about the answer. They want the right answers as well, but they certainly want to encourage students to show the process, to show the procedure they went through. It seems to have gone way beyond the value of the teaching lesson. My understanding, again from another the national standards professional, has said that the standards, if they just say what they want them to achieve, would be a standard, but they want them to achieve the standard by using this approach, and by using this approach, and by using this approach, and they're actually mandating how to teach and not necessarily just what to teach. And I don't know about the advanced grades. I'm thinking more in terms of the elementary grades, and that the propensity to use these number lines and the humps and the bumps and the boxes and the squares and the dots and the lines. That's all great, in this person's opinion, to teach the concepts of math, but not as a matter of practice for actually completing the work. It's cumbersome and tedious to force them to do it in the actual completion of the work. And that's been a complaint. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing, is that the emphasis is on how, showing a graphic representation of what the problem is.
I can kind of go both ways on that. To answer your question a little bit, I maybe shouldn't say this, but to me that shows a lack of understanding on the part of the teacher, not the question itself. If the teacher can't see it could go either way, then that's a totally different topic. There are great things about learning that way. There are good things about teaching the kids. Like I said, a lot of kids understand, if I do this, this, and this, I get this answer, and then I'm good. But they have no idea why. They have no idea what that means. You can ask them, I say, what does 3x mean? Well, that means you have 3 x's. That's what that means. But they don't understand. They just, 3x, I don't know, that's just this thing you put on the board, And so the goal, I think, of all that is to get them to understand what we're talking about. What does that mean?
Some of them aren't developed and really able to.
Well, I don't know that I contradicted myself, but
We got to hold the questions down from the audience. We won't make it through.
But the whole goal is to get them to understand, not just do a process. Do I agree with all of it? Absolutely not. There are definitely things I do not agree with, but like I said, this should be a work in progress, which I think is kind of why we're here, what we're looking at. This got adopted, and now we're looking at it going, what did we just adopt? Do we need to change some things? Do we need to fix some things? Yes. But we need to work through the process and find the things that are going to work for us, the things that we want to do, and make sure it continues. It should be a work in progress, not just here it is and you're stuck with it. Let's work through and find the things that work and see if we can make it better. I think that's the point.
You started off your comments, though,
Let's
earlier
hold
tonight.
it
We
down.
are stuck with it.
Let's hold it.
We are stuck with it. We can't do anything about it. Have to go to the legislature.
Well, I think that was the point, that he made at the very beginning. We're not here we can't change the law here. We're just discussing. That's all we're doing. We can't fix it right here.
Let me just add this. We said right at the beginning, we will not change the law tonight. We don't have the ability. But we're educating us so that you can then contact your legislators, and that's how the law gets changed. And it will get changed if enough of us don't just listen here tonight, but then act on it. And I think that's I'm going to follow the question up here with another question, and that is, it's always a challenge when we get new concepts, new ideas. And we got the ability to work through those with these adjustments you're talking about.
I'll just take off from the math question. That's something that's pretty close to me, at least in my school. I'm a former math teacher, and so I follow that. I work with kids that are struggling with math. And what we're doing now as far as teaching kids math is, I'm so glad my grandchildren will have that opportunity that I didn't have to learn math in ways that make sense to them, in a way that they can really understand what they're talking about. And we're teaching math the way people use math in the everyday workplace. I work with a 6th grader who struggles with math. But the other day he needed to take 23 times 7. And he started work for his peers. Wait a minute, you know how to do that. Oh yeah, 20 times 7 is 140, and 3 times 7 is 21, so it's 161. And he can just do that. If he'd had to work through the algorithm, he'd had trouble, a very difficult time remembering what to carry and where to put it. But if he just breaks it into pieces that he can work with, he can solve those kinds of problems really well. And the models that we use demonstrate what's happening, and it makes it gives kids a number of ways to learn to use and apply math, and I think that's really good. There's a lot of good things. As far as we talk about curriculum, I don't like all the things that are in the math curriculum. We use the Engage New York because in our small school where the teachers are responsible for 2 grades, we weren't going to be able to write any curriculum. We don't have any expertise. The books we had are 20 years old. They were not going to help us get kids ready to take this test. And so we looked on the internet for a lot of opportunities, and we chose to use Engage New York. And the one thing I'll say about that, there's parts of the standards I don't like, which focus a lot on the standard algorithm, quite frankly. It's my least favorite topic. But the text is extremely well written. The questions are very challenging. Kids enjoy that. And I think it's for us going on the internet, downloading an entire math curriculum, and our cost is duplication. That's really, really inexpensive for us in Cambridge to get a really high quality, well-written curriculum for our students.
Great answer.
Can you help me with the question again? What was my question?
Yeah, there's always a challenge with something new. Can we
overcome the
Can we
challenge?
overcome those challenges and make the adjustments that need to be made?
Well, I think that Idaho teachers are going to, even though there are many Idaho educators that don't agree with a lot in especially SBAC, some of the Common Core standards. But do we not go to work or not try and do the best we can for kids? So I guess it's a pat on the back to all of the Idaho educators in that many have felt slighted, underappreciated and underpaid, especially over the last several years, and they still show up and try and differentiate, love the kids, make it a safe, caring, good place for kids. Whether they want to or not, they go to work and do the very best they can, and we'll continue to do that. Can we change? Can we do some things? Well, it really comes back to the legislature and having the legislature give some more control back to our local school districts, so that your local school district gets to decide what's best for your kids in your community and gives you some flexibility. So it really is some pressure from citizens to the legislature in trying to get some things changed there. I do have one other comment. SBAC tests. The State Department of Ed had said, don't be surprised if when we finally do get our test scores from the SBAC, if our proficiency rates don't fall a lot. I don't know where we're at in Idaho. In Madison School District, we're at about 90% proficiency rate for math. According to the ISAT, that's what we were getting, and about 92 or 93 for reading. Language was probably 88, something in there. So we had high proficiencies. And we're being told, expect your proficiency rates to fall, as maybe even into the 30 or 40 percentile ranges. And so we're a little concerned with when the kids take a test that's more challenging and a lot longer, and then they come back and they're used to receiving, and I don't want to inflate, mean, I want to be honest with kids, but when they're used to receiving a proficient or an advanced, and now they're coming back and saying you're below proficient, and you have the majority of the kids coming back and saying, wait, only 30% of the kids in your school are proficient. Then I start to wonder, is that the test or is that the kid? Because what teacher would give a test that 30% of the kids can do well on and then say, well, it's okay if they all failed, at least I know where they're at. Because that's what you hear.
All right, can we change Common Core? No. Common Core was developed by Achieving, and then Achieving gave the copyright to the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Those two organizations, those two trade organizations, own the copyright to Common Core. We have, a copyright is there to protect a product. We have no ability to change the standards themselves. As long as we are roped into Common Core, we're roped into everything that goes along with them. We've been given permission to add 15% to the standards. But that 15% will not be on the tests. So it's questionable as to whether or not that change will take place. There is no mechanism within the standards themselves to make any changes either.
So, what was the original question again?
I forgot it too.
I forgot, all right, well, I think it was something as to what, can we overcome the challenges, you know?
That's what it was.
Was it, can we make this, change the standards, or can we overcome the challenges, or what can we do?
We can make adjustments within the program sufficient to overcome the challenge.
Okay, well, I don't know about that. I was just gonna say, you know, as a teacher, what do I do to try and get this to work? You know, we've talked about, there are no textbooks out there that do Common Core. They don't exist. There are people that have said, oh, we've got one that does it. Nobody even knew what Common Core was. Until we've gotten this SBAC test, which you know, teachers aren't allowed to look at it, so we still don't know what they're trying to test. What do I do in my classroom? I try and increase the rigor a little bit. I can't change the whole thing this year. I'm adding a few things. I'm adding more projects. I'm adding more things that the students have to try and do outside of just learn the material and regurgitate it. It takes time. It's going to be a process to try and get us to where we need to be if this is what we're going to do. Can we overcome it? Of course we can. But it's going to take some effort. It's going to take some time. And to be honest, I've heard people say, oh, my teachers love this. They get to develop their own stuff. I don't have time to develop an entire curriculum. No offense, but, you know, I like to sleep occasionally, you know. So is it, yeah, it's not something I want to do. It's not something I've got time to do. So I do the best I can. I keep increasing a little bit as I go and try and make my kids as ready as I can get them.
There's several questions I've got over here that are duplicates. We'd like to get to all of them tonight. We're not going to be able to. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But one comment I'd like to make is that these teachers, specifically the teachers here, are doing the very best of what they have. And I think they need to be complimented for doing that. They're doing what they can. That they didn't see anything wrong. I've talked to several superintendents, and they've engaged their teachers in developing the curriculum even on their own time, without being compensated for it. The question, the reason I asked Erica to make this comment, because there's several questions in here relative to how do we get out of Common Core. So I just wanted to pose that question, and when I posed that question, and it's been addressed a little bit, but we have a member of the Senate Education Committee sitting here.
So anyone, including him, I think we need to have a comment on this is, do we have an opportunity, and I know there's been discussion of this level at the Capitol building in some of the committees, do we have an opportunity to get out of certain aspects of Common Core, i.e. the SBAC testing? Or can we do something, as was brought up tonight, about the data collection? And are there some good things about Common Core? I think some of these teachers believe there are. How do you save the good things and throw away the bad? And can you do that from a legislative standpoint? I'm going to invite Senator Pearce and anybody else now. That's a summary of a lot of questions.
And related to that is the fact, does Idaho have the financial ability to develop their own program?
That's a loaded question. Let me make you aware of 2 or 3 issues to start with. We've already talked about that. We are unhappy, and I can speak for a number of legislators, we're unhappy with what we're seeing. You know, there's a difference the way we sometimes look at things. We have people that love the status quo and cling to it. We have other people who are, like Columbus, they're out in the deep blue sea looking for the next new land. And so we have all that in between. And in the Senate this year, the votes were there to repeal Common Core in the Senate committee. Our chairman would not hear of it. He had the ability to stick that proposal in his drawer. On the House side, there was not that much sympathy to get us out of Common Core. Now, we have a number of options as a state. As has been said earlier by these some down here, that we can go and adopt standards from Massachusetts. They have excellent English standards. California has excellent math standards. We have those options to do. As Texas has done, Texas has set their own testing system up. They've written their own tests. You see, there are people who have studied the Common Core and the SBAC test and find statism, progressivism, moral relativism are the basis of what's in this test, in this program. So that's why many people are having a problem with it. Texas eliminated that by simply not going into it. We still have that option open to us. If we go too far down that road, we will not get out. And so this decision is going to be made shortly as to what we do. And the options are open to us. As has been mentioned, there's many tests we can take. I want to tell you one more thing that's an interesting concept that we need to think about. Finland, who is the top education nation in the world, in other words, their children, when they're tested, compared to the very top, and have for several years, they used to have a government-driven education program, which is where we're going. They now have decentralized, and they're allowing these innovative teachers to teach their children. They spend less hours a year in the classroom than our students do, but they out-test them. So as we take more government control, our test scores go down. As they take away government control, their test scores are going up. Is there something there we need to learn?
Maybe that's a good place to end, is it? In other words, we have a lot of questions yet, and we can pursue them. But I think it comes down to one thing, and that is, if we all make contact with our legislators, we can modify it to the point where it becomes a great program. That, the key is, let me make one more comment. Sure.
You guys, we have fabulous teachers. We have teachers that are dedicated and want our children taught. And I think we need to untie their hands. We need to turn them loose. You know, and maybe it's a bad time for me to make this comment, but I've watched in the state as we have come down with the programs and more programs and more programs and more programs, and guess what? We have demoralized our teachers and our students the further we have gone. We need to reverse that trend. And I made that statement several times this year in Education Committee. We have overdone it. We have over-regulated. We have overpassed and said how we're going to do it. And we need to back it off and allow our teachers to use the innovation. You know, you guys, we had the greatest education system in the world for many, many years. And now we're where? We're declining. And it's what we've done to ourselves is not, and I'm not putting this burden on the teachers, I'm putting on what we've done to the teachers. And so those are the changes that we need to make, that I feel that we need to make, not the changes of more programs, more programs, more programs. We need to go back to what we used to have.
Have we answered most of your questions? Do you want to call off?
Can I just suggest that you give each board member just a few seconds, if there's anything that they feel strongly about that they weren't asked, that maybe they can share with us? Because they each have their own special things that they probably feel strongly for or against.
I think that's a good idea. Let's do that, and then we'll end the discussion. I want to make some comments.
Tell everybody thanks for all the questions. Sorry we couldn't get all of them.
We're sorry we couldn't get to all. We think we covered most of the basics. And obviously, there's quite a stack here, but there's a lot of duplication, so we can work on those. So let's turn the time over.
I'd like to go first, that way they get the good stuff at the end. I think I maybe ruffled some feathers here, because I was asked to be on this panel to be pro-Common Core. So I tried my best to do what I was asked to do, okay? I'm not all in favor of Common Core. Matter of fact, if you were to ask me any other time, I could tell you a lot of things I don't like about it. But I was trying to talk about some of the good things, some of the things that are good about it. Yeah, I was trying. So, are there good things in Common Core? Yes. Are there things they're trying to accomplish? Yes. Are they doing a good job of it? Not so much. But the idea is there. There are things we need to fix. There are things we need to do better in education. Like I just mentioned to her, she said, as he was saying, we ought to let the teachers go and let them teach. I told her, I said, actually I was trained in that. So anyway, I think that's about all I have. Thanks for not killing me.
Okay, I want to kind of summarize here overall. When Senator Pearce was talking about the lack of progress in education reform, I was thinking back on a recently referenced Cato Institute study that they did in February of 2011. They took education data and compared it from 1971 through 2008, because that was the most recent available, showed I believe it was reading, science, and math standards or scores along the bottom of the graph. And they were pretty much flatlined. I think English scores increased by 3.4% from 1971 to 2008, and math only increased by 1%. But on the same graph was federal education funding. And the federal education funding went straight up through the roof, and it had gone up by 375%. So the practice, this is not, maybe the teaching methods and the standards might be new with Common Core, but the underlying education reform direction in terms of high-stakes testing and outcome-based objectives, that's nothing new. This is just more of the same. It started when we had Goals 2000, we had School to Work, we then had No Child Left Behind, now we have Race to the Top. It's just kind of all the same kind of throw money and technology at the problem, and it's going to fix it. I want to read something to you here real quick, and then I'll be done. And this kind of sums it up. For those of you that have been paying attention to this all along, you might remember Mark Tucker, who wrote back in 1992 a letter to Hillary about education reform. And I want to quote just a couple things out of it and see if it doesn't sound similar to what we're currently seeing with Common Core. His plan was to remold the entire education system into a seamless web that literally extends from cradle to grave and is the same system for everyone, coordinated by a system of labor market boards at local, state, and federal levels, where curriculum and job matching will be handled by counselors accessing the integrated computer-based program. His goal was to design our education system on the German model, which was a workforce development system. And I think that's kind of the overview, I think, of the field that I have as to what we've achieved with Common Core.
Just quickly, I want to say, I don't care if Common Core are the best standards in the world. I would still not want them in Idaho because of their top-down federal encroachment upon our state. This has less to do with the standards than it does the strings and the mandates that are attached to them, whether it's the data collecting or the equitable distribution of teachers or the turning around of low-performing schools. Those, in a lot of ways, are a lot more concerning to me than the standards themselves. This is not about education. Common Core is not really about education. It is about workforce training and making your kids a cog in the machine. It's part of what the powers that be, and it's not just the federal government. Let me say that there are enough corporate entities that are involved in this that stand to make a lot of money off of it that want this pushed forward. This is corporatism at its finest. Let's keep the parts of the standards that we like. Let's take what the teachers like out of the standards, let's build on those, and let's create something uniquely Idaho that will lead Idaho to the top of the nation as far as our education system is concerned.
Bruce, in your closing comments, I know that a lot of people would like to hear this one last question asked, because I know you commented on this at the Capitol building in January. We know that the previous testing cost X amount of dollars. What is the expected increase in cost with SBAC due to the length that it's taking and putting it all together on a district level or at the state level? You did make a comment relative to that at the Capitol building.
I'm trying to remember. I know the time involved in the testing is, from the ISAT, it's at least double. We haven't really felt the cost right now. I can't tell you specific numbers because the districts aren't forced to pay for that right now. But as far as time, double. As far as paying proctors to come in and help, double. As far as time out of the classroom and not being able to teach, we're losing double the time. As far as the need for technology in the classroom, in the schools, unless you're blessed in some areas to have these one-to-one devices that were privately funded, it really throws a burden on the school district. And we haven't received any new funding for curriculum. It's not like our budgets went up so we could buy new curriculum and textbooks to help teach to these standards. So it's really throwing us in a tailspin financially. So my final comments would be, I just am so impressed with Payette in this area. I really enjoyed being here tonight. Now, I'm not originally from here. It's the first time I've ever been to your town, and I have to say, I think you're a class act. I really enjoyed being here. And inviting someone from Southeast Idaho to even just come and give an opinion of what we're seeing. And the things that I've told you today are what we see, what we're just dealing with. I hope it's been helpful. And my other comment would be, it's a shame that this is such a good model and such a good example. It's a shame we didn't have this kind of dialogue all across Idaho before Common Core was adopted. It's such a shame. And I hate to come to any. I've been a principal for a number of years before my current position, and we would have concern sessions, which were always fun for me. So I would open up once a month. I'd have the teachers come in at will, and I would make myself available, and concerns would come. And I realized how much I appreciated teachers that would not only come in with a concern, but some solutions, at least some ideas on how to do it. So I'd like to offer a few before I leave. With Common Core, I would love to see the legislature, and this is something out of our control, but I'd love to see them give back local control to school districts. also like to see with that, if we could get away from this high-stakes testing, that would allow schools to restore the balance of curriculum. Right now, we're really heavy math and we're really heavy reading, and those are great themes. But no one's been in here discussing tonight fine arts, history, health, science, government, civics. I mean, where are those? And can we please restore some balance? Because don't want our kids to And then as far as the SBAC, the test, my Common Core is a concern. SBAC is to me a greater concern. And my suggestions for that would be, can we save the Idaho taxpayer a lot of money and just stay with the SAT? Everyone and in order to comply with federal compliance measures that the State Department is worried about, State Department of Ed, let's adopt a test that's already out there that's a lot cheaper. And I'll give you an example. The MAP, Measures of Academic Progress, performance. Academic progress. So there's a test out there. I took a look at it. It's not bad. It's a lot shorter. It's a lot less intrusive. It's a lot, it seems to make a lot more sense. And we can do that and still meet the intent of the law. So that would be my suggestions for the SBAC. And then my last one would be, if Common Core is a concern and SBAC is a greater concern, probably my greatest concern is the data mining and the data collection on kids. And I agree, we need data. I don't think anyone disagrees with Mike's comments. I thought it was great that they do need some data. We've never disputed that. Why haven't we talked about this in the past? Hasn't been an issue in the past. We turned in files and reports in the past. Never an issue. It's now that the data is so intrusive. There's actually 412 data fields, I counted them. 412 data fields that we're required to send to the state every month. And my suggestion for every kid, so by name, yeah, and by their state number. You know, every kid has a state number, an ID number. So my suggestion on that would be, voice your concern to the State Department of Ed and ask them to please roll that back to once at the end of the school year and have a minimum number of data fields where we can give we can get a good idea of how Idaho kids are doing by summary, not by name.
Well, I come tonight as a supporter of Common Core, and I don't think he said a thing I disagree with.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to have a lot in common. What I like about Common Core, I think it's taught us or showed us through our teaching that students can achieve at a higher level at a younger age than what we thought. Have we gone too far? I believe we have in some cases. We're asking too much of those students. It's beyond their development. But we are able to do more. Our students are doing more today than I thought they could have done 5 years ago. It's amazing what these young children are able to do. Students find, now, and a lot of this is through the math project, in the elementary school, students that have been using math models and different ways of thinking for 3 years, they would never go back and do the math I did. In fact, I can tell you an example. One day, one of the teachers showed up and wasn't very well prepared and gave the kids some naked problems, which are what we always worked on. You just add, subtract, multiply, divide, then you got a couple story problems at the end. And the kids looked at her and said, "Why would we do these? What's the point? They don't mean anything." And so it's what I have for today. And finally, the kids said, "You write a problem for number 1, you write a context for number 2, you write a context for number 3, and then we'll do it. At least it would mean something." And so kids are expecting different things. Our kids, I see kids that love being challenged by 3 or 4 step math problems, where they have to read closely and figure out what's going on. They have to read the story. What happened in the story? What was the action? And they're pretty excited about that. Kids get excited about a lot of the challenges I think we see in the course. So from the curriculum side, I think it's been pretty good. It's opened our eyes to what's possible I think it maybe has gone too far, but I will also say without a doubt, we don't have any art. We don't spend any time with art. Our social studies curriculum obviously struggles in science as well. When you look at to have all your students grow 1 year in reading takes a couple hours a day, and math takes a couple hours a day, there's not much left. If you go into an elementary school where each teacher has 2 grades, and they teach a couple hours to 3rd grade and a couple hours to 4th grade, the whole day is already gone and they haven't covered anything else. So they have to find other ways, and they're very innovative, and there's things they can do, but quite frankly, it does eat up a huge part of the day, and I think there are other pieces that are equally important that don't get their due. So, I don't think I find any disagreement.
I think we need to stand and give an ovation to this.
We do.
Now, having been in a different part of the world, where we hear their test scores are better than ours, you don't have to look very far to realize that what nation has accomplished more than any other nation in the whole world than where we are right now. Now, if we get caught up in the negative part of life, we'll go backwards. But if we look at the good of this program and other programs and move that direction, I think we'll accomplish a great deal. Thank you so much for coming.